Good afternoon and welcome to today's third session of the PENC Virtual Raleigh Seminar. Again, I'm Katie Cox. I'm here to help moderate the session today. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. We will take questions throughout the presentation today, so please feel free to type those in at any time into the questions box or the chat box, and I will monitor those and ask them out loud to the speakers. Today's speakers are Susan Habina-Woolard, Matt Noonkester, and Craig Gresham. Susan Habina-Woolard, PE, is the town engineer for the town of Matthews in North Carolina, where she works on various projects in transportation, stormwater, right-of-way management, and policy development. Prior to joining the town of Matthews, Susan worked at the Charlotte Department of Transportation and for various other municipalities in North Carolina and Ohio. Susan holds a Bachelor of Civil Engineering and Master's of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Dayton. She is the 2015-2016 past president of PENC, 2018 to 2020 past chair for the NCEES Fundamentals of Engineering Exam Development Committee, and a co-founder of the North Carolina Women in Engineering Conference. Susan currently resides near Uptown Charlotte, where she enjoys hiking, playing with her cats and dog, volunteering at neighborhood events, and building STEM projects with her son. Matt Noonkester has 23 years of experience managing projects that help local, regional, and state government officials tackle difficult public policy planning issues. He has extensive experience using geographic information system software to measure the built environment and leading community groups through a scenario planning process. Mr. Noonkester has partnered with staff and elected officials throughout the United States to prepare regional growth studies, comprehensive plans, small area plans, corridor studies, comprehensive transportation plans, metropolitan transportation plans, capital improvement plans, land development regulations, development impact fee ordinances, and other special studies consistent with state law and community context. Before forming City Explained Inc. in 2015, Mr. Noonkester owned another successful planning firm, led a community planning team at 2 different large engineering firms, and served in the public sector, holding the position of zoning compliance planner for the city of Bloomington, Indiana. Craig Gresham has 24 years of experience in travel demand modeling, traffic forecasting, and GIS. Before starting Clearbox Forecast Group in the fall of 2009, he spent 10 years at Kimley Horn and Associates and 3 years with North Carolina DOT Transportation Planning Branch. Craig specializes in travel model development and application, HOT/HOV model analysis, multimodal analysis, project level traffic forecasting, and socioeconomic forecasting. When not staring at a spreadsheet, he enjoys spending time with his 2 kids, working on projects around the house, planning to exercise, pretending he's still good at snowboarding, camping at bluegrass festivals, and finding a good local craft beverage. Thank you all for being here, and Susan, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for choosing our session on the Matthews sub-area model. Get my slides to advance here for a minute. I think we need to write shorter bios because that took up like 5 minutes of our time. All right, so a town engineer, a traffic engineer, and a transportation planner walk into a bar and, just kidding, we didn't. We walked into a conference room and kicked off our sub-area model project. I'm Susan Habina-Woolard, town engineer, as Katie said, and my co-presenters are Craig Gresham from Clearbox and Matt Noonkester from City Explained. We'll share with you today the problem that we are trying to solve in our approach. So the problem being, can we refine existing regional transportation planning tools for the Matthews area to better provide insight into transportation issues and solutions? And the approach was to take the regional travel demand and land use models and refine and connect in a sub-area model to provide more detailed transportation data for the town of Matthews. This topic isn't one I've seen a lot in PENC seminars, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to share the talents of Matt and Craig with all of you as far as the connection with land use and transportation. So our agenda for the presentation today is up here on this screen. I'll talk a little bit about why Matthews and spotlight Matthews, and then Matt will talk about the project background. Craig will go into detail about the transportation model, and I'll talk about the findings and conclusions, and hopefully at the end we can have a group discussion. But as Katie mentioned, go ahead and type your questions into the chat box, and we'll pause at various points during the presentation and answer those questions for you. I am not going to presume that all of you know, are familiar with the best small town in North Carolina, in the town's humble opinion. So I've got a few slides here for you. First of all, we are located about 13 miles southeast of uptown Charlotte. You know, in reading the history of the town of Matthews, we've always been a transportation destination. Since the 1800s, it was a stopover for the stagecoach, and then the rail line, now the car, and hopefully in the very near future, light rail. The town was incorporated in 1879 with a population of just under 2,000. Of course, now our population is much more than that. We're around 33,000 residents within our 17 square miles. The town maintains about 100 miles of road within our town limits. The state has more, and then the town maintains all the sidewalks along the town and the state roads in Matthews. Town has a lot to offer the Charlotte area that makes it a destination, starting with our vibrant downtown. We have our farmers market is a very popular destination. We have great historic buildings, lots of events that are held downtown, wonderful downtown restaurants, and our parks are a destination as well as our greenways. Those of you who are in the Charlotte area, if you haven't been on the Matthews 4 Mile Creek Greenway, I highly recommend it. You can park at the community center and access the greenway there, or you can park on Council Place off of John Street and access the greenway on that side of it. Also, the Mecklenburg County Sportsplex is located in Matthews that has a lot of events and sporting events and shopping. Local businesses such as our local consignment shops and Renfro Hardware up to Second and Charles and Sam's Clubs, if that's where you'd like to shop at. Like the Charlotte, all the towns in the Charlotte area, right, we've had an explosive population growth. This map, though, that Craig pulled for me, the width of the line of the roads on this map is the volume of the map, or volume of the roads on the map. And as you can see, the roads through Matthews are a conduit for the Union County populations to the east to get into Charlotte to the west. This creates this kind of this friction between moving cars and moving people, right? And then on the previous slide, none of those pictures of Matthews show people sitting in cars, right? So Matthews has this idea of people gathering together and not sitting in their cars. I do want to point out, though, that those pictures I showed were obviously pre-pandemic, right? Let's all recognize the fact that the current pandemic situation we're in has had an effect on traffic. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about future traffic. In transportation planning, we usually talk about 25 to 30 years out, and that's going to be the focus of the presentation today. There's over a dozen state transportation improvement projects that touch the Matthews town limits. And I stole this image from a future slide. You'll see Craig is going to talk about it, and I stole it because this image slightly scares me. This table of all the projects that are funded and projects that are needed but not yet funded that are on our plan. The first two projects that are on this list talk about the John Street widening project. Now that project is a state transportation improvement program project. And in working with the state in the planning phases of this project, really heightened the need for detailed transportation data for local decision making. The plan for the road was a 4-lane median divided facility that goes into our downtown. But the people of the town were like, well, wait a minute, we like our 2-lane road. We don't want to cram all these cars through our downtown. With the work I'd done at Charlotte DOT, I kind of had this idea, like I knew that there was a group of people who worked on a model that ran scenarios and got data for what might happen in the future. So I met with them and I said, we have this John Street working group that's tasked with figuring out what we would like to see on John Street, but I think they need more data. Can you help me with data? And we ran some scenarios, and what I ended up doing is bringing back to the John Street working group, here's some data. And guess what? The findings are inconclusive. Nobody likes to hear that, right? But I said, what it means to me is we need better data, and I know there's a way to get it. Enter in transportation planner Dana Stujenki, who we brought on staff, who knew exactly what I meant and knew exactly how to get it. She's known Matt and Craig for a while with this kind of modeling, this traffic modeling. And so she was able to get us a grant for funding for the sub-area model and enter here our partnership with Matt and Craig. So I'm going to turn the presentation now over to them for more detailed information on our sub-area model project. Matt?
Okay, thank you. Let me just show my screen here. All right, thank you, Susan. And as she had mentioned, I was going to go through a little bit of the project background and then hand it over to Craig to really share some of the results and findings that we have. So again, to put a little meat on the bones, as Susan had mentioned, we had a target in place. We were trying to hit the bullseye. And really what we thought we were doing was creating some tools to help create that data that Susan mentioned, but also information for all the key players in a decision-making process like this. So in North Carolina, especially, even compared to other states, there are very defined roles and responsibilities for how growth and development and then the supporting infrastructure is provided. In this case, the local governments are really making the decisions for land use and where things go. And primarily the North Carolina Department of Transportation is really in the driver's seat, no pun intended, for trying to help us find the transportation solutions here, or at least organizing them with their partners in the region. And so to that end, we had to try to create some tools and information so that we could share viewpoints and opinions back and forth in order to get to a consensus conclusion. As Susan had mentioned, we started this project, or they started this project out in 2018 with the John Street Working Group, and it was more localized and grassroots and became formal as a group and was really looking at these issues and starting to work with the partners. However, again, more information was deemed necessary to move forward. In 2019, again, Dana Stujanki had was able to find the funding with CRTPO, which is our local or our regional transportation planning organization in the area. And then they were able to bring some consultant resources on board, for which Craig and I represent those. And then we just got really busy with our partners. And so we were working with the Metro Liner regional models. So they have their own set of working groups and things. But then we also really honed in with the decision makers at the town to make sure they kind of knew what was going on and how we were doing things. So the simplest way I can kind of emphasize what we did here was we tried to do a little more TLC in the town and the region. So of course, we're talking about transportation and land use coordination. And we're recognizing this phenomenon that you see happening around the wheel here. And Matthews has always been a desirable place to kind of grow, develop, live, and visit. And as that more development comes, more vehicles come with it. And whether those are local trips or also the kind of attractiveness of the entire region, you now have vehicles traveling through Matthews who are also competing with the same roads for people who want to locally access Matthews, and that creates more congestion. And we have this kind of dual purpose and confusion of whether a road is really for local purposes or regional purposes, and it just creates more and more angst for the corridor. Ultimately, as Susan mentioned, transportation planners will start to identify road improvements, and that list is quite long that they have right now. And that's supposed to introduce new capacity or make it safer to travel in the transportation system. However, as that occurs, more and more people find out about Matthews or find out it's easy or efficient to travel in and around Matthews. So it becomes more desirable. And as it becomes more desirable, more development wants to head there. And so it becomes just sort of a vicious cycle of kind of chasing your tail, as some people will say, in order to figure out what's going to happen next. So then what we ended up doing was we basically boiled down transportation and land use into its simplest form, which is, from a land use perspective, we're looking at demand. So the demand to want to access the transportation system and acknowledging that where land uses are and how intense they are within the town and the region affects travel behavior. So different land use patterns and intensities affect the trip generation for an area, the route length, the route choice, and even the mode to take between two uses. And so it really has a big impact on the transportation system. So we study demand. And then Craig, as my partner in crime, really focused on supply. And with supply, we focused on the road and transit network, namely the Silver Line, as Susan had mentioned, and what it might mean to the town of Matthews. But we didn't really focus on walking or biking or things like that. The tools weren't really ready for that. But we really looked at what it meant to the efficiency and the routing of traffic based on these different development scenarios. And so as part of that, we use 2 different softwares. And those softwares were used to do kind of answer these sort of research questions or options that were running around in our heads, starting with the John Street work group and kind of through the years, just kind of becoming our list, our punch list of what to do. And so looking at land use and transportation together, we wanted to look at local versus regional trips and which corridors they needed to take to efficiently either move through or move to points within the town. We did look at congestion now as well as in the future. So we looked out many years and several decades to see kind of what conditions might be. And then we looked at what happens if we look at a single road for moving vehicles or whether we look at it as a system. So does the improvement have to occur in one corridor in terms of widening lanes, or can we widen lanes or add lanes or network in other areas to offset the needs of a single corridor and have the system operate more efficiently? And then ultimately, we did end up looking at sort of some of those high traffic destinations so that the town was prepared moving forward for planning its future. Now, again, we use 2 different analysis tools. I'll go over the land use side, which was Community Viz software, and I'll hand over to Craig for the rest of the presentation to go over the transportation analysis software. So in terms of land use, we use Community Viz, and it sits on top of ArcGIS software. So if anybody in the room is in the engineering fields that maybe doesn't use ArcGIS, it's geographic-based information system. And what it does is not just collect data, but where that data falls and what's occurring with it. So we really tried to map and tie the data to points within the town. It does sit on top of ArcGIS software, so it's a component of that. And most importantly, it looks at kind of what build out might be for different growth scenarios. So how much of growth and where and what type. It looks at where the most desirable places to grow might be because of several factors that we load into the software, and tries to anticipate where that development is going to go. Then ultimately what we do is we take the software and what we've created for the current scenario, and we test many different scenarios, alternatives that might be out there. And there's no limit on how many you can test except your ability to keep it all straight. But ultimately what we're end up doing is we're exporting data that the travel demand model needs in order to run and do its job. So ultimately this is causing and creating the bridge between land use and transportation. And we've basically built and calibrated the 2 land use tools to make it a seamless handoff. And so with that, let me hand off the presentation to Craig on the Transcad model.
All right, let's see. Get this window out of my way. So the other tool that we use, the one that's transportation based, is a software called Transcad. It's also a GIS based software, but it is a standalone package. It's commonly used in the state for transportation planning needs and is utilized by NCDOT, MPOs, regional planning organizations in the area. For this particular project, we utilized one that's called the Metrolina Regional Travel Demand Model, which covers the greater Charlotte area. There's actually 10 counties, and I'll show a map in a second. There's many ways that that regional model is used, including highway planning, transit planning, conformity, congestion management, and currently it forecasts traffic to 2045, and they're in development in 2050. So this type of model, they try to stay 30 to 40 years out, and what that allows us to do is capture those bigger projects like freeway projects, those things that might need to be built in the future in the region. So this particular model, it's very detailed, but it is regionally focused, just the sheer size of it. It's, say, the 35,000 foot level that you're looking at. So with that, the more you zoom in, the more pixelated it gets and the rougher the data that you're trying to work with. So For those of you who may have never heard of a travel demand model, this is the 1-minute course on them. What they typically do, they're estimating the current and future travel demand. Like a weather forecasting model is looking 5-10 days out. We're looking 30 years out. We're looking at it for either a region or NPO. And these models, the demand is coming from the population and employment, the people in the jobs. The supply is the transportation network. So when you use this type of model, it's estimating how many trips are made, where they choose to go, how they choose to get there, and then what level of congestion that you might have. And it's essential to the long-range transportation planning process. In this map, you can see the metro line is shaded in gold areas. There's 10 counties, including one in South Carolina. And Matthews sits about where the I-485 sign is in Mecklenburg County. So if you take that mental image of that 10 county, and then on the next slide, we zoom in, Matthews is a much smaller piece of that regional model area. So when we take that regional model and look to go to a more refined picture, we're more at the 5,000 foot level now. So there are traffic analysis zones that the regional model uses to store the number of people, the employment by type, both in current year and 2045. So this data that Matt's projecting with Community Viz is data that we take into the regional travel demand model. And what that does is we're not just looking out the window to see what the weather is like today, we're projecting what it's going to be like in the future. And in the same regards to the travel demand model, we're trying to look at where are the people and jobs in 2045, and then what impact does that have on the transportation system. So with this, in the Matthews area, we had 38 traffic analysis zones. We disaggregated or broke those into smaller TAZs to use for this sub-area study. So we went from 38 to 137, and the smaller ones are represented in the small dashed lines, where the regional TAZs are the larger gray line. What that allows us to do is put more roads in the transportation system, to get more access points and get a clearer picture of the traffic that's in the area. So with that, the regional model, as it is mostly regional roads. So if we go into downtown Matthews and see what's in there, it's really the main north, south, and east-west roads and a few of the major collectors. What we wanted to do was refine that, and with that, with those smaller TAZs, we were able to add a lot of the downtown streets and other supporting streets that the town considers important. It also allows us to isolate different land uses, and say there's a large school, we're able to break that into its own traffic analysis zone separate from the neighborhoods that are beside it, especially if they don't share common access. And then the other thing that we're able to do once we zoomed into this area, the regional travel demand models are very data intensive. The Metro line one specifically generates about 30 gigabytes of output, and it takes 12 to 16 hours to run. So there are things that we're able to do with a sub-area model once we clip it out and treat it as a standalone product that we couldn't do with the regional model, just because of the sheer amount of data that we're dealing with. But once we got down to the Matthews area and we clipped that out, those 137 smaller TAZs, we're able to do some different modeling techniques, including instead of looking at large time period chunks like the regional model does, where they look at an AM, midday, and PM, we're able to look at 15-minute chunks throughout the entire day. So starting at 6:30 a.m., looking at 6:30 to 6:44 a.m., 6:45 to 7 a.m., etc., through the entire day, and see how the traffic changes as the day goes on. So, this is a brief animation that kind of shows what it looks like from the output that we can see. So in this particular graphic, I'm looking at the 2045 network that is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So this is the adopted plan that the RTPO uses. And what it's doing, it's showing in 15-minute chunks what traffic looks like. And it's the more green, the faster the traffic, the less amount of congestion. The more orange and red, the more congestion that you have. So you can see that as you go through the middle of the day, it gets kind of low. Then once it gets to 3:30, 4 o'clock, and then as you get into the PM peak, you start to see more and more spots that are congested. So, and as this just loops through, I'll just talk about it just a little more. So what that does is for each one of these, we're able to look at not just what a daily number looks like, but also we can look at, say, is it pervasive congestion throughout the day, or is it just an area that 30 minutes or 45 minutes of the day that is congested? And with different scenarios, how does that change? So while we started with a regional tool and we're using a lot of data from it, once we get down to the smaller sub area, we're able to use some newer and emerging practices to get a more refined picture of what's going on.
I'm going to pause for questions here, Craig.
Yes.
All right, we don't have any in the queue currently.
All right, never mind then.
Matt, you want to handle this part?
Sure, and Craig, I'll just have you advance the slides for me if you don't mind.
Yes,
so again, in terms of project scenarios, we wanted to control what we were looking at and not get too far out of a lane or too far over our skis so that we could look for the cause and effect relationship. So in scenarios 1 and 2, you see that what we did was we took the existing rules and policies that are in place today from a land use perspective, what's on the books for the town right now, and we kept that constant. And we looked at 2 different transportation scenarios. One where we had the fiscally constrained projects, meaning that list that Susan had mentioned of things that are kind of in the pipeline and going through the formal process. And then we had what we called the town modified list, which we're looking at maybe new connections, maybe not having as many lanes in certain corridors as we're balancing kind of that placemaking with our throughput. And so we looked at that compared to the existing land use patterns that are there today. If you look at scenarios 3 and 4, what we ended up doing was we took and kept the we took the land use pattern and we changed it, to what we called emerging centers, which were different activity centers that seem to be forming within Matthews naturally just because of the gravity of wanting to make it a destination, but also how that gets kind of supercharged and moved quickly because of the silver line, the light rail line that's being discussed. So just this brings to life a little bit on the land use perspective, the existing rules and policies in place today. And you see on the left-hand side is a land use map, and the yellows and golds are single family residential, so detached homes on their own lot. And you see that takes up a large majority of the planning area. But you do see the gray as a large industrial area. The pinks and purples sort of center of left represent downtown and some of those mixed use ideas that are occurring. The large green area between the 485 and US 74 elbow there is a very successful and desirable regional park that the entire region comes to. And you see that bright red along US 74 is a lot of suburban commercial. And so it's like the pictures that you see on the right-hand side, more low scale, single use type development is kind of the first option, which is the adopted plans option. Next slide. And then this was the hypothetical or aspirational scenario that's being looked at right now. And this is recognizing what's going on in the region in terms of a light rail investment and initiative, but also some local things going on about creating discernible places in Matthews and destinations for both local residents as well as visitors from the region. And you start to see a lot of the reds and browns and things turned into pink. And pink here represents mixed use destination type development that would be served either by transit, like you see in the picture on the left, or be its own kind of standalone walkable area where we would try to have homes and work and shopping in close enough proximity that maybe you don't even need to take your vehicle. You could do it by walking or biking. Next slide. And then ultimately what was happening here was we did not want to, kind of make this too academic. So we wanted to assume what is in place stays in place today, except for those areas where we see reinvestment being a real alternative. And so in the end, only about 19% of the land was actually changed between the two scenarios, recognizing that single family detached neighborhoods and things pretty much stay what they are unless there's just incredible energy to try to redevelop those. So we focused on the 19% that you see in green. And by changing from the existing land use scenario to the emerging centers, you see that we get more growth, more ability and capability to grow in the town because they're more dense and more mixed use. So you see here, we're looking at up to 6,100 new homes. They may be single family detached, but they might be multifamily or somewhere in between. 16,000 new residents could come between the two different scenarios, and about 1,850 new jobs that we would be projecting as well with the scenarios. And so this is the information on the land use side that we gave Craig for his scenarios.
Thanks, Matt. So along with the two land use scenarios that we're producing with the traditional growth and the emerging growth centers, we also had two different transportation project lists. The first list are the ones shown in blue, and those are the adopted projects in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Those are assumed to be built by 2045. The second set of projects in red are what we call the town plan alternative. And so for the most part, the town plan alternative projects were in addition to those that are in the MTP, with the one exception of the John Street widening that was through downtown Matthews, and which was one of the main impetus of doing this project altogether. With the question being, how does John Street function as 2 lanes versus 4 lanes through downtown Matthews with those two different land use scenarios? And are we able to put in other projects that are able to accommodate traffic without that John Street widening going into place through downtown? So I'll talk some about the results of this of the sub-area model. And just as a recap, we had 4 scenarios that we looked at. We had 2 different land use scenarios with the traditional growth versus the more defined growth activity centers and the higher number of people and jobs that were surrounding the Silver Line and that planning corridor. And then we had 2 street networks, one with the adopted MTP and one with the additional town projects and the exclusion of the John Street widening. So I won't spend a lot of time on each one of these slides, but it's to illustrate, this is the information that we presented to the Matthews Board of Commissioners and the planning groups to understand what the impacts were of the 2 different land use scenarios and the 2 different transportation network scenarios. So in our first scenario, this is what we would consider the baseline. This is what it looks in 2045 in the PM peak hour. With the darker, the red means more congestion in the PM peak, and the green is less congested. So John Street runs in the middle of the screen between 485 and NC 51 was our main focus point, but we did consider the area as a whole while we're looking at this. And as you would expect when John Street is widened to 4 lanes, that there's some congestion through downtown, but there's not a lot with the additional capacity. When we do the town alternative, where it's only 2 lanes through that same section in the PM peak, we do see some more congestion, but we're not at total breakdown. And that's one of the things that was important, is to determine, well, what's the acceptable level of congestion to keep it 2 lanes through this area. When we looked at the adopted network, the adopted MTP, along with the emerging growth centers land use scenario, so it's the adopted street network and the more intense land use growth, we do see that still John Street looks, there's some congestion through downtown. Once you get north of NC 51, we start to pick up more congestion, and we're getting more congestion on 51 as well. When we take the 4 scenario, where we have that more intense land use growth and 2 lanes through downtown, again, we see more congestion with 2 lanes versus 4 lanes, but we're not seeing the entire system break down, and we're not seeing John Street turn into a parking lot, which is, of course, the big concern that NCDOT has. One of the other piece of information that we shared was the common areas of congestion. And this is existing spots that, if you are familiar with the area, you drive through, you get on 74, that, it's pervasive. People deal with it every day, and mainly along the corridor. It's John Street, where it crosses NC 51, where it intersects with 485, and then along US 74 and NC 51, where we see those congestion parts. And the future, with some new roads that are coming in, we see some new areas that pop up where congestion is not bad currently. One of those, Independence Point Parkway, goes almost parallel to 74. So there is some, it's a very attractive roadway. It connects a lot of people at CPCC with retail around 51, and then up to US 74, along with some new spots to the south of Matthews in the vicinity of 485, where there's a new interchange that is planned at Weddington Road and 485. If we were to take and zoom in more into the downtown area, and specifically the John, it just gives an additional view that, when we're looking at those areas, we don't see areas outside of a lot of the ramps and interchanges where you expect those delays. And remember, we're looking at the PM peak, which is the worst conditions. When we look at the more intense land use, one thing that we noticed is that even though John Street looks better with 4 lanes through downtown, as you reduce it to 2 lanes, you actually, with the reduction in through traffic on John Street, some of the cross intersections like John Street and NC 51, and then Sam Newell Road and NC 51, actually perform better when John Street is 2 lanes versus 4 lanes, because of the reduction in through trips through downtown. As this was the main purpose of this analysis, was to look at John Street, we then broke down further and looked at what the daily traffic implications were. So through the downtown, the shaded orange area, we were assuming either 2 or 4 travel lanes. Outside of that area, to the north of 51 and to the south, 485 and south of that, we were assuming 4 travel lanes in either scenario. So it's really, the toggle here was that 2 lanes versus 4 lanes in downtown Matthews. So with that, we looked at a planning level of service. So it's a daily capacity versus the daily number of estimated cars that were in there. Since some might not be familiar with this, we're not looking at intersection level of service. We're not getting that microscopic. This is more of a mesoscopic model where it's in between getting into synchro or some other intersection level of service analysis. And so we're looking at general planning capacities and relating that to a grade, A through F, with F being the worst traffic congestion and A being the least amount of congestion. So with that, in our existing conditions, most of the corridor operates at LOSD or better. Once you get south of I-485, it is F there. It's carrying a tremendous amount of traffic for a 2-lane road. That is one of the projects that is going in with the widening through that section. So when you look at the first scenario, which will be the second column, you'll see that that section, even though the traffic nearly doubles by 2045, it goes from an F to an E with that additional capacity. Along with that, all the other sections of the roadway improve from a D to a C, with the exception of north of NC 51, where the traffic nearly doubles and it goes from a LOSC to a D. Now, as you go to the town plan, which reduces John Street to 2 lanes, through that middle section, you see that it does go, conditions do worsen. You go from a C to an E in the main downtown area. And, but we're not looking at anything that has a LOSF, which is, consider the most severe congestion. As we go to scenarios 3 and 4, where we have more intense land use growth, the traffic does increase because we do have more people and jobs. But between the two scenarios, again, we have where John Street in that downtown area goes from a LOSC to LOSE, and then the other sections remain comparable. The other notable thing about this is that there is a reduction in traffic. In the upper table, I'm showing the numbers of vehicles per day. So when you go between the MTP and the town plan, you have a drop in traffic of 10 to 20% through downtown Matthews in the future. And considering the type of the way Matthews envisions the downtown and the walkability for the Silver Line, more transit-oriented developments like that, it's an appealing. It's appealing to have less traffic going through downtown. So it's kind of matching the vision for having a sufficient transportation network with a livable area that we're looking at. And with this particular one, the closest thing I can relate it to are the people that are familiar with Raleigh and with Hillsborough Street, where it went from 4 lanes to 2 lanes 10, 15 years ago, where they added in a median, more parking, more crosswalks, roundabouts, those things, and made it more pedestrian-friendly corridor. They as well saw a drop in traffic 10 to 15% when that happened. So I don't think it's out of the, I think it's realistic what we're seeing here with the reduction as it stays 2 lanes versus 4 lanes. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Susan to talk a little bit about what the town of Matthews had to say about it.
Before we do that, I just want to check in with Katie again. Do we have any questions?
Yes. Is there any consideration for a town bypass such as North Carolina has?
Can you go back, Craig, to show a map?
Yes. Let's see. How far back it is.
So for, what was the last part of the question? Like who has?
Monroe, North Carolina.
Gotcha. So there are a couple bypasses. Well, so NC 51 is a bypass. It used to go through the middle of town. And it was back in the 70s or 80s that that bypass was created to take NC 51 out of downtown. Now, the new bypass that we're seeing would be you come in and you take 485 to 74 to get around downtown. Or if you're coming from the southern, like the Weddington area, you would come up typically Weddington Road to Trade Street, then you would take Fullwood out to 51 and Sardis Road. So these like bypasses were modeled in with Craig by this table here. Number 22 is Fullwood Drive widening. That's kind of the southern bypass of downtown into Charlotte. And then the 485 and 74 projects are numbers 5 and 6, and then 17 are already funded by NCDOT as STIP projects. So those have been modeled, but not officially like creating a new roadway around downtown, just focusing our efforts on different roadways and to create that bypass.
Okay, and they just,
Yes, and
sorry.
I was going to add to that. You know, when you go into the Matthews area, it's fairly built out, so the opportunities to do a large bypass like a Monroe bypass are fairly limited. And one of the things we did look at in the town plan alternative were some additional actions that served, I would say, as a local bypass, like project number 24. South of downtown Matthews, it's the red line that goes sort of east to west, where it provides additional connectivity in the Matthews area south of downtown.
The question asker just clarified the Monroe bypass is a toll road to get trucks past the town to reduce congestion. So just wanted to say that.
Similarly, the 74 project is a managed lanes project, and so is the 485 project. So managed lanes is congestion pricing tolling, so that people can have reliable travel times into uptown Charlotte by going into those managed lanes and paying the toll for that.
And then could you just confirm the dynamic analysis, does that reflect use of the future land use map?
Yes, so the dynamic traffic analysis was using the future land use projections along with the future networks with the different sets of projects in place.
All right, great. That's the only questions we have right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katie, and thank you, Matt and Craig, for the great detailed, and those of you who submitted questions, keep them coming. You may be wondering at this point now, what does this all mean to the town? Well, first and foremost, Craig provided a lot of detail on the John Street project, which was the impetus for this kind of bigger sub-area model project. And it's great for us to know that East John Street can stay 2 lanes. The world won't come to a screeching halt. But notice his sub-bullet here is you know, it relies on a system as a whole view. And that's the network that Craig was referring to. With that, traffic moving through town is anticipated to be reduced by 20 to 25%. Keep in mind, there's a tipping point here, right? Like, oh, we need vehicles to go through downtown because we want downtown to be vibrant and people go there to shop. But you want the people in downtown to want to be downtown. So this reduction in traffic we're truly seeing is through traffic whose destination is not Matthews, their destination is Charlotte or Monroe. And so that's the reduction that we expect that this 20 to 25% is reflecting. Bonus for us, we discovered new pinch points in our system that we didn't know before. So Craig pointed those out when he was talking about the current congestion and future congested areas. And that was a real eye-opener for me to see really how the system is going to perform on such a specific localized level with our emerging centers. Plans that we're anticipating are going to come up or be developed in the next 30 years. So now staff has a shift. Right now we know where we need to focus our efforts in securing funds and creating better street networks and multimodal improvements. The decisions for transportation come down to placemaking versus throughput. I talked about this earlier. We're talking about moving cars versus moving people. This was something we kind of knew beforehand, but the model really shows this with that land use and transportation connection, how integrated they are and how they need to be integrated for those future decisions. Specifically, those emerging centers, land use scenarios, they create a new chapter for the town. We're already vibrant, but there are more and more development coming to the town. We need to be ready for it. And this model shows us, specifically where we could be ready for it, and continuing to utilize the model for different scenarios so that we can make good decisions about our roads and our transportation system. I love this last light bulb here, 2-lane cross section. Tends to have lower volumes, as Craig showed. And again, as I explained, we want the destination traffic to use the roads and the bypass traffic to use other roads, like the managed lanes. So that 2-lane cross section with lower traffic volumes tends to also come with lower speeds, better crossings, more signals, will better support the needs for the emerging centers scenarios where people feel comfortable walking, biking, taking transit to get to their destinations. And one of my favorite parts of engineering projects that I have, like building a sidewalk, is when I'm done with the project, I'm done with the project. I get the sidewalk built and you can walk on it. Maybe 6 months later, there's a warranty check, but the project is done. But what I'm learning about planning projects is when the project is done, guess what? There's more work to do. So that's what this slide is all the work that's still left to do. We're really excited to have this Subarea model project completed, but we need to continue to educate staff and our elected officials about the results of the model so that we can use that in long-term planning efforts for the town. We also need to coordinate with that MRM team to make sure that the results of our model and the data of our model, goes into that regional model, so that we can continue to have better data coming out of the MRM. We need to include the findings of the model into we're currently doing our Metropolitan Transportation Plan update, the MTP update, and that's through CRTPO, our Regional Transportation Planning Organization. And we need to update all of our locally adopted documents that show streets differently than how we modeled them in the model. So that's our comprehensive transportation plan, maybe other components of other sub-area plans, like planning documents. Those all need to be changed to reflect the results in the model. That's it for the content of our presentation. Any other questions in the chat box, Katie? If not, I've got a few I can pepper Craig and Matt with.
There aren't any yet. I'll give people a few minutes to type those in. I think, Susan, you're probably good to go ahead and ask your questions.
All right, Craig, can you go to the next slide? See if the first one pops up there.
That slide?
It didn't. Oh, no. Wait a minute. Wait for it. Got it. Is this just a Charlotte regional thing, or can this work be done elsewhere?
So this particular model, the Matthews Subarea model, it was designed and developed in such a way that CRTPO can utilize it for other areas in the Metro Atlanta region. So within that 10-county area, it's could be universally applied in any part of the study area.
And Craig, on the land use side for the community viz model, it's already being used in the biggest regions of the state. So in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area, there's already a model up and running. The Metrolina region that we're in, Wilmington, the Greensboro, Winston-Salem area. So it's already kind of caught fire and is used throughout the state.
Right. I'll add, this isn't the first sub-area model that's been done in the state or done in the Charlotte area. It's a little different in the way that we broke the traffic down into those 15-minute segments and assign traffic dynamically, which means the congestion carries through each of those 15-minute segments. So that's the emerging technology that, hopefully as it goes forward, CDOT will continue to refine and implement, and NCDOT will take a deeper look at to include in studies for other areas.
So Craig, you mentioned NCDOT. Are they going to use the data from this project, do you think?
Well, what I would expect is, as you say, that the analysis is never done. It only goes to the next phase. So hopefully as they continue to analyze John Street and CDOT continues in the development of the next MTP, that it's one of the tools that is utilized by the state for the analysis.
Matt, any thoughts on that?
I agree with Craig. I think the conversation is going to continue. In the absence of data and information, we tend to speculate. And so I think this is one more point to give clarity and to maybe wrestle down some of those issues where there might have been disagreement. Now we have something to react to. But I would hope they would use it. I mean, jokingly, I'll tell you, they help fund it. So obviously they must be supportive of it.
And from a staff perspective too, we did a ton of work as well on this project. I mean, we sat for several sessions going through every parcel and is it developed, is it underdeveloped, is it vacant, what's the opportunity? And so there was a lot of like staff level decision making on a parcel level basis to put into the community viz. And then to think about our street network on the transportation side and where is it reasonable to continue streets and build our network, what's reasonable to build. And being a small town, we don't have unlimited funds, and so we are reliant on NCDOT to help us fund networks too. So knowing that staff put a lot of time into this and that DOT helped fund part of this definitely makes it a more statewide importance. And hopefully other small towns are able to get their own planning funds and do a similar effort.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, specifically for John Street, this was still at a 5,000 foot level. So as you get further in project analysis and look at the actual corridor level, this doesn't provide the answers of intersection delay and where turn lanes are needed and those things that are at the 1,000 foot level. But what it does is gives better input data to use for that type of analysis. So while it can't do that analysis, it's very helpful as those tools are being utilized for project level analysis and design in the future.
Gotcha. Well, Katie, we're getting right up on the hour. If there's no other questions.
There's no other questions. Matt, Susan, and Craig, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Everyone, attendees, your PDH form and NCBEL survey will be emailed out shortly. And then our last session today is the FIU bridge collapse, and that's at 4 p.m. Matt, Susan, Craig, any final thoughts?
That's it.
ENC, thank you all of us for attending our session today.
Great, thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.